Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review of the book Leviathan Wakes. And I really enjoyed this book. And I got onto this because The Expanse is based off of this series of novels. And this is the first one. And I gotta tell you, I liked that my only kind of issue with the first season was kind of where it ended, and this one at least goes to the conclusion that kind of happens up in season 2, and it's really kind of weird. When I was reading this, I essentially had both of the versions kind of fighting in my head, not because I thought one was superior over the other, but mainly because I'd seen The Expanse first, and now I'm going back to read it, and you get different kind of descriptions of what's going on. So you're just like, okay, how does this work? How does that work? And usually I read the source material before the adaptation. That doesn't always happen out, but sometimes I usually prefer one over the other. This is one of the examples that I've got where I kind of like both adaptations because they both have something that they give. Kind of like the Harry Potter novels and their movies. Lord of the Rings and the movies. Hobbit is a whole different kind of conundrum and a half. But I definitely would put this in that category because the book has differences than the show. It follows the same kind of beats of, okay, we've got Holden with Canterbury, we've got Miller at Sarah Station, and what's going on with that. And the thing is how certain things are done. One of the advantages that I would give to this show is that we do get more of an Earth perspective because we don't really get that in this. It's pretty much just done with Miller and Holden being our point of view characters, which isn't a bad thing because the good thing that the show does is gives us a lot of ensembles and various different kind of characters to see through, but it's kind of harder to pick one that we're actively following. Here, the thing is, a lot of characters don't get fleshed out as much as in the show, but that doesn't mean that they're like cardboard cutouts. They're still there, but it focuses mainly on Holden and Miller, and then towards the end we get like a Fred Johnson kind of thing. So that's one of the things that I really liked, is that we got more emphasis on Holden and Miller, and their points of view and their points of differences on how they do things. You feel that Holden is more of the kind of protagonist where shit is just crazily happening to, and then Miller is also the protagonist, is his kind of detective story of trying to find Julie Mao. And you get more of his cynical kind of nature because it's delved into deeper because we are in his head. And we get into Holden's idealistic nature and how Don Quixote and those kind of ideals shape and form him with what's going on, where he will give as much information as possible so that people can try and draw their own conclusions, where that does have negative effects that Miller's you shouldn't be doing that. We get a lot more of that in here, and I appreciate that. Yeah, one of the main just only kind of negatives that I would have is that I'm usually more of a paperback kind of person. And the thing is, this is just gigantic, even though it's almost 600 pages. And it's just kind of awkward to read. That's it. I love the style and the tone and how everything goes because Miller's got a distinct voice and definitely falls into the noir detective story of trying to find the stuff with Julie Mao. Holden is more of the, how to say it, alien blue-collar dude trying to do his kind of shit, and then just that accidental protagonist that keeps getting pulled into crazier and crazier shit and is always trying to do the right thing, even though it keeps pretty much pulling him into oh, okay, my ship got blown up. Oh, shit, this could be linked to some kind of weird conspiracy with the Martians. The Martians now have us. Okay, gotta make sure my ship people are not killed. Oh god, the Martian ship got blown up. Its escalation is, I don't know, since I'm reading it, it feels more gradual, I guess. Now, granted, I did sometimes, except towards the end, hit myself to be go through 2 chapters. Miller chapter, Holden chapter. Miller, Holden kind of thing. And it had a nice kind of pacing at that. Except when I'm like trying to get to the end, I'm like, what the fuck? It. Not that the show went kind of crazy, but it did have to kind of try and condense stuff, and then of course, because of depending upon how many episodes it would have, because there's a lot of stuff in here that they kind of had to retool and reconfigure to get it into the show. Like one kind of big example is, of course, we don't really get an Earth thing, so we're mainly focusing and trying to figure out how that means that Earth is more kind of pulled back, and we don't get those kind of machinations there until we get towards like the proto-gen shit later. And that's a bigger kind of thing as well, because Dresden is more of a business dude that's got certain kind of scientific underpinnings, but he's got the delusions of grandeur, godhood kind of shit that he's trying to push off. So that's kind of a bigger kind of change. Another thing is that it really leans more into the cosmic horror because of the description that can have. Now, granted, I can understand the show not wanting to get graphic depending upon how its time frame kind of goes out, but it at least stuck close enough to it to where it didn't kind of like completely sanitize it. Here, we're talking about like ribs with arms kind of like walking through Ceres, fucking hands flying with wings and shit. It's like, holy shit, they really, like, you can go into some crazy ass details with what's going on with the proto molecule. So it follows the same kind of stuff. We get Miller trying to figure out what's with Julie, and it's really cool to get more of his thought processes because we're in his head. So it's kind of easier for us to understand how his thought process is going on. Whereas in the show, he has to like talk to like an empty room or whatnot, which works because he's still kind of going and explaining his thoughts, but you're kind of easier to kind of see how it's. I know that sounds weird, but it's easier to kind of see it playing out in the book than in the show, because sometimes you've got to have him like say something which kind of sounds stupid, but when you look at it through how the book kind of does it, you can understand it because he's going through his thought process, and you can't really do that unless he's actively either talking to himself or you have to do voiceover of him in his head to do it. So it's not that big of a deal, but it's kind of cool kind of aspect to see. So I really enjoyed it because I like seeing him kind of go through. We definitely even learned kind of more about Julie Mao as well, of how her dynamics are and how everything is kind of. It's not so big that it's like great giant changes. There are some things, like I said, with Dresden, that's a kind of bigger departure, but it's all close enough that you're like, okay, the show translated pretty well, but this is also a very good story in this format as well, even though this was like the first format. And I would highly recommend it to anybody that's watched it. And it really gives you more of an insight into the characters, definitely Holden and Miller. Not that Naomi and Amos and Alex are like left on the wayside. We do get some stuff going on, but they're not point of view characters. So that's that kind of downside. And it really, because you could see the show and you're like, oh, okay, here's all these characters, but you never, sometimes because it feels more ensemble-like and they can focus on other characters, you don't get as much to like Holden and Miller, and you're like, all right, we'll kind of see how this works out. So I was happy that I read this. I did like seeing the overall changes and the different kind of dynamics with the certain politics of it going on, where Earth kind of stayed back most of the time until like we started seeing different kind of like ship things being revealed with like the stealth ships. How the Belters kind of felt with certain things. We definitely get more of a kind of Belter view as well. And not as much on the Martian front either. We mainly get characters from Mars. We do get some certain instances of like getting information from Mars. Definitely more than Earth. But when we start seeing the factions having to figure out what's going on and see how the war was pretty much just utilized as a kind of happy accident to test shit going on with like Eros and all that, it's nuts. And that was crazy to see that explained in detail of Holden and Miller and their whole ordeal of getting irradiated and having to escape Eros as we get the vomit zombies and everything. It's and their whole kind of trying to explore what's going on with the proto-molecule and what it could mean for Earth. I really enjoyed it because it really did a good job of getting you invested with the characters and making sure that the plot kept everything driving as well. What I mean by that is I'm usually more along the proponent of characters need to drive the story. Now, does that mean that it must be sacrificed to plot? No. But I've seen a lot of things where people sacrifice characters to a plot demands kind of thing, as that's kind of usually more along the line that people go on. That doesn't happen here, so I would definitely recommend fans of this show to definitely read the book, because sometimes I get burned with certain things, and so I just started out with the first one, and I'm like, I really like this, and I really like just going on at a nice kind of pace, because it's got great characters, it's got a great overall plot structure with very intricate kind of things going on with the politics between the belt, Mars, and Earth, and now this rogue alien element that's showing that we are not alone in the universe. And just because of some happy accident, we didn't get completely fucked over before we could even come out. And seeing them trying to be like, okay, the proto-molecule was probably sent here and was probably going to do stuff with, like, simpler celled organisms. We don't even know what's going on with this. And I understand. It's really kind of crazy because you're like, okay, I understand wanting to test, but you could ask for volunteers or whatnot. You don't just go to a space station and go like, hey people, we're going to irradiate you and fucking throw some weird ass shit on you and see what fucking happens. And to see if we can figure out what the fuck this thing wants. No. 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 Fuck no. And it's interesting seeing how the two characters of Holden and Miller had their two different views of justice, where Miller fucking's like, screw the Dresden dude, and shoots him just off the cuff. It's like, I understand he's dangerous and is trying to, like, he made all these, like, sociopath people to do all these experiments to do the proto-molecule, but, he could have had other operations and experiments in the works that you would need that information to stop this. This thing is, yes, it's out in the system, but left unchecked would just create all kinds of havoc, chaos, and all that. I understand wanting to make sure this dude doesn't do this shit anymore and that we've got an imperfect system, but just going completely nutto on the dude and just being like, you know what? Done. That doesn't finish it. It's like, you got to make sure that you've got all the information that you can get and make sure that he is no longer a problem, because now it's like, okay, he physically himself is no longer a problem, but what about the rest of the shit that he had in motion? Who knows? And then Holden's like, but Holden's arguing on him on a different matter. Like, that's just me being like thinking about the situation. Holden's like, we don't do that shit. That's not right. You're off. Of course, that sets off the whole rift and everything, as we then see that he goes with the OPA. I kind of like how it worked more in the book, but I could understand how it kind of worked out more in the show, as he kind of like went to the Mormons to kind of like see what was going on with the Nauvoo, whereas this, he's just like, yeah, we kind of have to deal with that Eros thing. And I liked how they were able to do stuff more with the whole Julie Mao shit with Miller in the book than in the show. Not that the show did a bad job with it, it's just they could do different kind of things that would be harder to do in a show. So, man, I really enjoyed this one because it, again, characters, plot, and action. Like, it is hard to get those to be translated well and done with a good, consistent voice, even though you're going through that this is a pair authorship as they like do certain things. You could tell with certain kind of flavor of, like, because Miller's noir detective kind of stuff, Holden's like, well, not complete but trying to be this character that rises to certain occasions and deals with weird shit that is happening to him, and it just flows so well. Even when they interchange and intersect in their own kind of stories, those voices for those characters are not lost. That is a hard thing to do, and I applaud him for it. I'm like, all right, I can't wait to kind of see where else this story goes. Now, granted, I have seen up throughout the seasons, but the thing is, this is different enough that I'm like able to keep my own. This is what happens in the book adaptations, and this is what happens in the show. And even though I know what's going on in the show, it's going to probably happen in different kind of ways that I'm going to be excited to kind of see what those differences are. And I would recommend this to people that are into those three main things: engrossing story, engrossing characters, and engrossing action. Now, I would definitely recommend it for an older kind of audience, mainly because of, I don't know, a thing that like restructures people and you have a rib cage kind of like moving along on an arm. Cursing is not horrendous. It doesn't get graphically sexual or graphic in certain killing things. So it's kind of up to a certain kind of thing. It's not like there's a fuck word every other page. Not that I would say that there's a bad thing about that. It's just in how it's executed. You know what I mean? And this, it executes like its profanity and everything kind of going on pretty well. It's not overdone, but when you see somebody cursing and saying fuck, shit, damn, all that kind of shit, you know why it's happening and it's appropriate for what's going on. And then like how they react to violence and what's going on, it's because you got to be careful when you've got like certain violent things going on where you don't want it to be like a glorified thing, but you understand that certain people are going to use violence to get what they want. So you don't want to, you need to thread that line where you're not like being like, hey, the best way to solve this kind of problem of like this thing making vomit zombies is to fucking bash everything in. The thing is, violence in that kind of instance is not the most accurate thing to go for, especially if you're going to try and bash a motherfucker in that's vomiting something that could turn you into a fucking like distended anus that could fucking unleash cosmic horrors. But I'm not saying that you just like you got to figure out what's going on. You know what I mean? It's they know how to thread it without being like a grindhouse film where it's like horror all the time, profanity out just to do shock value. Everything is kind of plotted and put in a place to be as effective as possible, and I always applaud that kind of work with this. So I enjoyed this. I'm definitely going to read the rest of them, and I look forward to seeing how these differences come into effect and everything, and also looking forward to the Expanse when it comes back on in December. Alright, so those are my opinions on the book. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.